Hello everyone, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and today I'm working on Twisted Scripture, the newest devotional kit from ByTheWell4God for October 2022. I am so excited about this kit because I think the devotional content is so important, and also I am so inspired to create with all these fun vintage mushrooms. So I'm actually starting on day 12 today. You know me, I don't necessarily work in order of the devotional. I just kind of pick and choose which ones I want to dive more in depth with. And day 12 definitely stood out at me because yesterday at church, our pastor went over the whole chapter of Jeremiah 29, and he made a lot of the same points that Tom made in day 12's devotional. So I decided that was an important one to document. And so we read it in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." And this verse often says plans to prosper you and not to harm you. That's the NIV version. And that's usually the version that's on all the coffee mugs or t-shirts or graduation cards. And it is taken out of context all the time. And so as we look deeper into this study, we really find what this means. Jeremiah is writing a letter to the exiles in Babylon, and he is saying that God is going to keep his covenant. Even though that they're in exile for 70 years, he is promising to keep his covenant with them. So this verse is in no way a prosperity gospel or even a graduation verse. That's not what it's talking about. And so we just really need to make sure that we're taking things into context. Also, Tom talks about how the word welfare in here actually means shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. And so that gives you even more insight about what this verse is really saying. Now, in regards to these numbers, these are the new big idea outlined numbers from ByTheWell4God. I am in love with these. I think they are the perfect clustering element, and you can also add them to remember the verse. So obviously, 99% of us know that it's 29:11. So I just decided to add this to the back of the page and kind of make it part of the cluster, but also a little bit part of the background. So I stamped on this tiny little mushroom paper that was part of the paper pack. And then I embossed the black edging around it with my clear embossing powder on VersaFine Ink. And right here, I am adding some frosted crystals. Now I know ByTheWell4God had this in the shop, and I love this stuff. It is kind of like an embossing glaze, but it gives this nice vintage look. Imagine kind of like antique cards that have that fun little frosted texture on it. That's kind of what this does. So I just wanted to add another texture to this page, and that is what I'm doing on these numbers. Now, I did just want to make note that the big idea outlined number set does have a colon in it. I chose not to use it just because I wanted it to be more of a background statement than this is a verse. So that's why I chose not to use it, but you could definitely use the colon as well if you wanted to. Now here I have one of those journaling cards. I love this set of journaling cards. I basically love everything, so just be prepared to hear that all month long. But I have one of these journaling cards with the mushroom on it. And then I took the flash card and just punched out the name or the word peace with my tab punch. And then this is some papyrus paper that I have in the background. I really love how that gives just a complete different texture to this page. And that is just kind of my layering that I've started. I also wanted to include the little quote from the devotional that says the Hebrew word that is translated as welfare or prosper is the word shalom, meaning peace in Hebrew. Now, if you've watched any number of my YouTube videos, you know with these sticker labels, I prefer to add some cardstock to the back side of them instead of just using them as a sticker. I like how it gives a more solid background and then you won't see anything through the label, but also it makes it more sturdy so it's not like wonky as it lays on uneven surfaces, like halfway on the journaling card and halfway on my Bible. So that is why I prefer to do that. And now I'm just kind of grunging everything up so I can start putting my cluster together. I always enjoy adding some metal pieces, and so I've taken out these mini fasteners from Holtz, and I'm going to add them to the little tab that I've created. So I'm adding that tab first. I'm just making sure that I have the right placement down. I will glue that down and then put 2 little fasteners through, kind of like it's holding it together. However, we all know that that glue is really holding it together itself. So I will just add that to the back side, and then I take a paper piercer and just kind of make a hole beforehand, because these mini fasteners are really mini and they are very hard to actually thread through the paper because they're so tiny. And so having that hole pre-done makes a world of a difference. So now that those are both placed, I will turn to add my label to this cluster. Now I do want a little bit of more texture to this page as well. So I grab my little bowl full of ephemera stuff, and there was this fabric that came along with the ephemera this month, and it was just kind of like an added bonus. So I thought about folding that and putting it under the label, and also some mummy cloth. But once I did that, it just seemed a little bit off, and the mummy cloth seemed to kind of, it was a little bit lighter and not so heavy in that bottom right hand corner of the cluster. And so I decided to just use the mummy cloth itself. When it comes to the numbers, originally I was just going to add them to my cluster as long as they fit, could glue onto that cluster. However, I ended up gluing that first number 2 down, and then I decided I was just going to use a ruler and line them all up, because it was going to be a little bit tricky to make sure that they were lined up evenly when I glued them to the cluster. So I just glued that one, number 2, and then I'll set the others aside so I can glue them to the background itself. And so then I grab my gathered twigs. I'm using just a fluffy makeup brush to add a light layering down on this background. I don't want this background to take away from my cluster. A lot of the times that's what can happen with my pages. And honestly, at the end of this, it is a very simple background. Usually I do a little bit more, but I do like it. I love this little fern that comes in this stencil. And so I want to add that. But first off, I'm going to oxidize some of this distress ink just by spraying it and adding some fun watermarks in the background. I still want to add a little bit to this background. So I take this handwriting stamp from Holtz, and I am just going to add some antique linen to it. Obviously, antique linen is lighter than gathered twigs, but since I used that fluffy makeup brush, you'll still be able to see a little bit. It's more noticeable in person, but it just adds this nice texture to the background. So I'll add that, and then I'm going to come back to the stencil clear view that was available from ByTheWell4God alongside this kit, and I'm just going to use the fern piece of this stencil. I'm hoping maybe ByTheWell4God will add just a fern stencil itself. I really love this, and I'll just add this to the bottom right hand corner with a finger dauber in my gathered twigs color. I definitely felt that I needed more than one, so I decided to add a second one right below it. I'm still using that same side of the stencil, but if you wanted them, to go the same way or opposite ways, obviously you could flip over that stencil and get the opposite view. So now I grab this ruler that I have, and I'm laying it out so that all my numbers kind of lay on that same line, but I'm first getting a clear view about where I want those numbers to lay. Now that I have an idea, I'll take my cluster off, so I just have to work with the numbers. I'll put the ruler down generally where I had those numbers down, and then I'll start gluing this down. Now I could be even more picky and, space them out exactly evenly. However, I'm just, doing it by eyesight and getting a general kind of spacing between the numbers. Now that I can put my cluster down, I'll glue it down as even as possible without using that ruler. But also this papyrus paper is going to soak in a lot of glue. It just has that kind of texture where it does that. And so I want to make sure that I lay down enough glue on the back side of this cluster to make sure that it holds well. I end up putting my date stamp in the bottom right-hand corner next to those ferns. And originally I was thinking that this page was complete, but it just didn't seem enough for me, especially since my background is so plain. I wanted to add a little bit more to this cluster. So I decided to take out my ephemera booklet that I had made with all my Tim Holtz ephemera pieces, and I turned to the Curator snippet page, and I am just looking for something extra to put on this side next to this papyrus paper, because there's a little bit of a thicker area right there, and that just is kind of asking for something extra to go there. So I'm just trying out different pieces. I really like that top piece. That's that reddish orange that matches with the mushroom. And then I finally land on this kind of square piece that's a dark brown, and it almost has a snippet on top of it, but it's actually printed on it. And so I'm just going to roughen up the edges a little bit, add some distressing, and then actually on that reddish orange piece, I'm going to use a frosted crystal again on it, just to add some differentiation to it as a little mini cluster. So same as last time, I'm using my Embossing Dabber. I love this thing. It's way easier than dabbing it onto an embossing ink pad. And so that works much better. I'm just going to heat it up and melt it a little bit to add that vintage frost look. And then I'm going to add more metal pieces, because why not? So I grab a little mini paper clip to add to this cluster. And then I'm also going to staple that red little snippet piece to the back brown one. I'll add a little bit of brown coloring to the edges of this cluster with a distress crayon, and then after that, glue it down to the page, and then this page is complete. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me over on Instagram at Wonderfully Made Handcrafting. I'll link everything I use down below in the description. Those are affiliate links, so thank you so much for those of you that use it, and I hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.